Welcome to Mr. Dread, the place where true horror isn't just told, it's uncovered. I'm the eye that sees it all, the wall that listens, and the mouth that speaks what no one dares to say out loud. Every 48 hours, I bring you real stories, gathered from the darkest corners of the earth. Like, share, and subscribe if you're not afraid to look closer, and tell me which story haunts you the most. I'm watching the comments. This happened in the spring of 2002, back when I was living in a quiet part of northern Arkansas. I had just moved into a modest single-story house after finalizing my divorce. It wasn't much, a plain little place with chipped paint and an old water heater that rattled like bones in a can whenever it kicked on. But it was mine, just me and my mutt, Rags, an old German Shepherd mixed with one ear that always folded back no matter how many times I tried to fix it. The area wasn't dangerous. Not by any means. The neighbors mostly kept to themselves, but they were friendly enough. The kind of place where people left their porch lights on and waved from their mailboxes. Still, something about that house always felt a little too quiet at night. I chalked it up to being alone after years of living with someone. Silence has a way of crawling into your ears when there's nothing to distract it. It was a Wednesday. I remember that because the trash had gone out earlier, and I'd forgotten to bring the bins back in. I went to bed around 10 p.m., book still open on my chest, a soft drizzle pattering against the roof like tiny fingers tapping the shingles. Rags was curled up at the foot of the bed, his breath slow and heavy. Everything about that night felt ordinary, until it wasn't. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavier, like it had thickened somehow. I could barely make out the glowing red numbers on the alarm clock. 3:12 a.m. Rags let out this low growl. Not a bark, not a whine, just a deep, guttural sound that rumbled from somewhere in his chest. His head was up, ears alert, body stiff. I whispered his name, and he didn't respond, just kept staring toward the hallway that led out to the living room. There was no noise, no footsteps, no creaking floors, but the way he was fixed on that direction made something coil in my gut. I sat up, swung my legs off the bed, and waited. Listened. Nothing. I grabbed the old flashlight from my nightstand, the kind with batteries that always flicker when you need them most, and headed slowly down the hallway. Rags followed behind me, his paws soft against the laminate floor, his breathing fast and shallow now. The living room was still. The light from the street lamp outside spilled in through the blinds, casting long shadows across the walls. I walked over to the front door, checked the lock, deadbolt still in place. I moved to the nearest window and lifted the blind halfway. Locked. Still, something felt off. I told myself it was just nerves, but I walked to the second window, the one near the front corner of the house, behind the small end table where I kept an old lamp and a stack of gardening magazines I never read. The blind was pulled down like always, but when I got closer, I noticed a faint breeze on my arms, cold air. From inside, my fingers gripped the edge of the blind, and I lifted it halfway. And there he was. A man, tall, broad shoulders, dressed in black, standing right there on the other side of the glass. He was wearing a ski mask, the kind you'd see in a bad movie, with the eyes cut too wide. His hands were already on the windowsill. And what I'll never forget, what still wakes me up sometimes at night, was his smile. You could see his teeth through the hole in the mask. Yellowed. Too many for one mouth. He smiled, tilted his head slightly like he was admiring a painting. Then he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Meal is ready." I didn't even think. I backed away so hard, I knocked over the lamp. Rags exploded into barks, deep, sharp barks that sounded more like a warning than anything else. I scrambled backward toward the hallway, shouting the first thing that came into my head. "I have a gun." I didn't. But he didn't know that. There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence. Then I saw him hesitate, just a flicker of doubt, and then he took off. I didn't see which way he ran, but Rags charged toward the window, snarling, throwing himself against the glass, like he'd tear through it if he could. I stood there in the hallway, flashlight still in my hand, my knees shaking like they weren't mine. I don't remember breathing for a while, just standing there, listening for anything else, Footsteps, voices, something, but there was only the sound of the blinds swaying slightly from where he'd touched them. I called the police eventually. They came, took a report, looked around, said it was probably someone passing through, said I was lucky, said next time I should really have a weapon handy, just in case. I did exactly that. Took a course, bought something small but solid, and every night since then, I've checked every window, twice. That house never felt right again after that. I moved 6 months later, and sometimes, even now, I'll wake up at 3 a.m. to a sound I can't place, the rain barely whispering against the windows, and I'll think I hear it again. That voice, that smile behind the glass. Meal is ready. You ever say something out loud that you immediately wish you could take back? Not because you hurt someone, but because something was listening. This happened years ago, long before streaming, long before everyone had a phone in their pocket. I was 23, staying in this old rental in a quiet neighborhood just outside Swansea, in Wales. The kind of town where you can hear your neighbor sneeze through the walls, but also the kind where no one asks questions when they hear a noise at night. I wasn't living there full time. The place belonged to a friend of mine who had gone to Canada for a year, and I was just watching it for a few months while figuring some things out in my life. Anyway, there was this girl I was seeing then. I'll just call her S. We weren't official, but she'd come over every now and then, especially when it got cold. This one evening, early December, she stayed the night. It had been raining, slow, quiet rain, the kind that doesn't even sound like it's falling, more like it's just hanging in the air. We were lying in bed, nothing much going on, just talking, the way people do when they're comfortable and the world outside feels like it's sleeping. I don't even remember how we got there, but the conversation shifted to creepy stuff, ghosts, childhood memories, things you chalk up to imagination. She told me a story about hearing whispers through her old baby monitor as a kid. I shared something about a time I thought I saw someone staring at me from my garden gate when I was 10. But when my dad checked, there was no one there. And just like that, the mood turned. She started pulling the covers up higher, glancing toward the closed door of the room, like something might appear. She laughed, kind of nervous. "Can we stop?" she asked. "It's late, and I'll start imagining stuff." Now, I've always had this bad habit of deflecting tension with sarcasm, trying to be funny instead of just letting silence sit. So I said something stupid. I said, "All right, you don't have to worry. If anything evil's in this room, the TV will turn on in 10 seconds. Let me explain something about the TV in that room. It wasn't connected to anything. No antenna, no cable, no VCR, no remote either. The buttons on the front were those old soft click types, kind of jammed in from age. I had never once turned it on, never needed to. It was just this bulky box sitting on top of an old dresser, collecting dust." After I said it, I smirked, and C gave me that annoyed side eye you get when someone makes a bad joke. But something in me felt tight, like I had just challenged the wrong thing, like I'd tapped on the glass of something that shouldn't be disturbed. 10 seconds. That's what I said. The first few seconds passed in silence. C turned her face into the pillow. I looked at the ceiling. I don't know why I started counting in my head, just quietly. 1, 2, 3, and then, right around 8, click. That was the sound. That unmistakable clunky click of a power button being pressed. And then,
Josh, 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 Josh.
The screen came to life, a full blast of white static, loud and sharp, like it had been holding its breath for years and finally let it out all at once. Sat bolt upright, her eyes wide. I remember the light from the screen lighting up her face, flickering like lightning through a dirty window. The volume was on full, maxed out. That shh sound filled the room, bouncing off the walls like it didn't belong to a TV at all, but to something alive, something exhaling. She grabbed my arm and asked, "Did you do that?" And the thing is, I didn't even move. I was staring at the screen like it had just spoken. I got out of bed, slowly, walked across the room. My hand hovered near the power button. I remember the heat radiating from the TV, even though it hadn't been on all night. It shouldn't have been that hot. I pressed the button. It turned off. Silence again. No flicker. No delay. Just gone. And that silence afterward, it felt wrong. Thicker than before. Like the sound hadn't stopped. Like it had just gone somewhere else. Sop was already pulling on her coat. She didn't even put her boots on properly. Just stepped into them and grabbed her bag. "I'm not staying here," she said. "I don't care what that was." I wanted to say something, to laugh it off. But what came out of my mouth was just, "Yeah, I get it." She left that night, never came back. We messaged a bit for a few weeks, but it fizzled out. She didn't say it, but I knew. Something about that moment changed things. Now maybe you're thinking it was some electrical fault, a surge, static buildup. But the timing. What are the odds that it would power on, full volume, 10 seconds after I jokingly dared something in the room? That the screen would come alive in a room where it hadn't been used for months? And I never touched that TV again. When I left that house, I unplugged it, taped the plug in place, and left a note that just said, "TV's broken." When I was a kid, I never saw my childhood as strange. I thought everyone grew up the way I did, surrounded by flowers that smelled like old perfume, polished wood, quiet crying, and the strange faint scent of formaldehyde that stuck to your clothes even after you left the room. My family ran a small funeral home on the edge of our town in northern Ohio, and I started helping out in small ways before I even hit high school. It wasn't morbid to me. Death was just part of the wallpaper. I swept the chapel floors, replaced tissues in the pew holders, sometimes passed around water during long services. By the time I turned 15, I'd graduated to helping in the office, filing paperwork, checking guest logs, that sort of thing. That particular winter, 2004, I think was already heavy. A few nasty accidents on the highway had brought in more business than usual. My father, who ran the place, was sleeping in shorter stretches. My mother handled the floral deliveries. I mostly kept to the front office, handling the things no one really paid attention to. Then we got the call. A young woman and her infant daughter had been found dead in their home on the west side of town. The news hadn't broken yet, but the voice on the phone was quiet and shaky. It was the husband. He said the police gave him our number. He wanted to arrange a private viewing. Just family, he said. Quiet. I didn't hear the whole conversation, just my father's half, but I remember his tone. He didn't usually lower his voice unless something was truly wrong. By the time the story hit the news, it was all over town. Some whispered details, others broadcast loud and wrong. Murder, forced entry, no suspects, a woman barely 30 and a 6-month-old child. The kind of story that makes people check their locks twice before bed. The husband came in alone the next day. Early 30s, clean-shaven, wore a black coat with the collar turned up. He looked like someone who used to sleep through the night, but didn't anymore. Pale, worn down, but not broken. I was in the side office with the copier when my father pulled me aside and asked for a favor. Nothing big, he said. Just go through the flower arrangements, gather the cards that came with them, and bring them to the husband in batches. See if any of the names stood out. After each one, make a photocopy, then return the cards to the bouquets. Quiet work. Delicate. He chose me, I think, because I didn't look like someone who belonged in a room where grief lived. I was young, polite, forgettable. People didn't watch what they said around me. I was just the helper kid behind the desk. The viewing was scheduled for the following evening. It was already dark by the time people began to arrive. The lot was half full, no press, but 2 plainclothes officers leaned against an old Crown Vic near the entrance. I was told not to speak to them. Inside, the chapel lights were dimmed low, the kind of golden glow meant to make things feel gentler than they were. The casket had been arranged just beneath the crossbeam, surrounded by white lilies and heavy calla bouquets. The woman lay dressed in pale blue, cradling her child in her arms like she'd simply dozed off. They looked peaceful, with the kind of peace you don't come back from. I moved through the arrangements quietly, keeping my eyes down. Some cards had just first names. Others had whole paragraphs scribbled in shaky cursive. A few were unsigned. I took each one to the husband. He stood near the last row of pews, alone. When I approached, he'd glance at the card, sometimes nod, sometimes shake his head. His voice barely made a sound. Don't know that one, or that's her cousin, or leave it, it's fine. He didn't cry. Not once, but his hands wouldn't stay still. I made several trips back and forth. Each time I passed the open casket, something inside me pulled tight. I'd seen bodies before. I'd seen parents weep, but this was different. There was a wrongness about it that didn't settle. The baby's head was turned just slightly inward, like she'd been placed that way on purpose, but not by someone who loved her. The police lingered just outside the doorway, pretending not to listen. At one point, I came back from the copier room and found the husband standing in the hallway near the guest book. I nearly walked right past him, but he called out quietly, asked if I could help him find a name in the cards again. I did. I didn't ask why. Later that night, just before closing, one of the detectives approached me in the lobby. He was older, short hair, a limp on one side. He asked if I'd noticed anything strange, any odd reactions from the husband, any names he paused too long on. I told him no. Then he lowered his voice and said something I still think about. The only witness was a toddler, 3 years old, said she saw someone leave the house that day. We think she's telling the truth. That's when I realized the man I'd been quietly passing cards to had been under surveillance the entire time. Over the next few weeks, things unraveled. The case hit local and national headlines. Turned out the friend of the family had been seen near the scene that day. The child, the witness, had named him without hesitation. They showed her photos. She pointed right to him. The friend cracked first. And the story that came out, it didn't sound real. The husband and the so-called best friend had been planning it for months. They'd made a plan to free themselves, to get rid of their families, and start new lives with the women they'd been secretly seeing. A swap of sorts. But only one family had died. The plan had fallen apart. And through all of it, through that night, those hours in the chapel, the quiet exchanges, I stood right beside him. The man who let his wife and child be laid in a casket. The man who'd nodded at flower cards like they meant something. The man who never shed a tear. He sat 3 feet from me, and I had no idea. After that, the funeral home didn't feel the same. The walls felt thinner, the air heavier. I kept helping out, but I stopped working the viewings. I couldn't walk past that spot in the chapel without remembering her face. The babies, too. It's been years now, but I still think about it when the rooms get too quiet. I think about how grief can look like anything. How a killer can wear the same kind of pain as someone who's lost everything. And how sometimes you don't see the difference until it's too late. Back when I was 20, before I knew who I was or what I wanted, I worked nights at a morgue in upstate Illinois. It wasn't exactly a job you bragged about, but it paid better than the gas station and didn't involve grease burns or the kind of customers who threw change at you when they were angry. I was a biology major at the time. thought I might go into pathology or something. The job was quiet, mostly. I worked in the basement level of a red brick hospital that had been around since the 40s, and it looked it. Peeling paint on the walls, tile floors that always felt damp no matter how many times you mopped, and this faint, sour antiseptic smell that hung in the air like old breath. My shift started around 10, and most nights it was just me and one other person, either the coroner or one of the other assistants. The dead didn't keep office hours, but they showed up regularly enough. Car crashes, overdoses, a few suicides, though those came in waves and always made the place feel a little heavier. There was a small hallway lined with stainless steel cooler drawers and a fluorescent light that buzzed so faintly you only noticed it when things got really quiet, which was often. This one night in particular, I remember it was raining. Not hard, just a slow, drizzling kind of rain that seemed to soak into everything. The kind that slicks the pavement and makes the streetlights glow like soft halos. It was a Thursday, I think. I had just finished eating some awful vending machine sandwich and was drinking stale coffee out of a chipped mug that said World's Okayest Technician on the side. I was training someone new that night, a kid named Sean. He was 19 maybe, thin as a rail with these wide eyes that made him look like everything surprised him, just a little. He said he wanted to be a nurse, and this was just a job to get his foot in the hospital system. He asked a lot of questions, but not in an annoying way, more like he was trying to figure out how to be calm in a place that wasn't meant to be calm. We got a call around midnight that a body was coming in. Male, late 30s, found unresponsive in his apartment by the landlord. No signs of trauma, no real info yet, just that he'd been dead maybe 8 or 9 hours. The paramedics had done their thing, and now he was ours. The gurney rolled in through the side doors, wet wheels squeaking across the tile. The man was under a white sheet, bare feet sticking out slightly, gray with that strange waxy look. I didn't think much of it. You learn quickly not to look at their faces if you don't have to. Faces try to trick you into thinking they're still people. Sean looked a little pale, but kept it together. I told him we'd wheel the body down to Cooler 3 and log the details later. It was quiet in the hallway, our shoes squeaking as we moved. The fluorescent light above flickered once, then settled. I made a joke, something about how the place always looked like the start of a horror movie, just to keep things light. Sean didn't laugh. He kept glancing down at the sheet like it might move. And then it did. We were about 10 feet from the cooler when the body shifted. Not much, just a twitch at first, a kind of tightening around the stomach, like the man was about to sit up in bed. I stopped. So did Sean. Then, before either of us could speak, the corpse began to sit up, slow, stiff, deliberate. His back curved upward, spine arching slightly, shoulders rolling forward beneath the sheet. Sean dropped his end of the gurney, so fast it bounced, the body sliding a bit on the surface. The kid took one look and bolted, full sprint down the hallway, through the exit doors, into the dark rain. Gone. I stood there alone, with the thing half upright under the sheet, the wheels of the gurney still creaking from the movement. I didn't scream. My brain just locked up. Everything in me wanted to run, but I'd been doing this long enough to know the dead don't get back up. Not really. I backed up slowly, like I was afraid of waking something. The sheet had fallen partway off the man's chest, and I could see his skin pale, mottled, a patch of dark discoloration near the collarbone. His face was still obscured, thank God. Eventually he slumped back down, body collapsing in on itself. The movement stiff, but final. Just like that, the show was over. I found Sean maybe 30 minutes later, huddled in the parking lot, under a stairwell, chain smoking and shaking. I told him what it was. Sometimes in the hours after death, the body can do strange things. Muscles contract, gases build up, nerves misfire. If the abdominal muscles clench just right, they can make the torso lift, just a little. It doesn't mean anything. It's not the person coming back. It's just the shell doing what it does. But knowing that doesn't help when it's 1 in the morning and you're standing in a basement hallway with a body that sits up like it's got something to say. Sean didn't come back after that, didn't answer calls either. Last I heard, he switched to landscaping work. Something about preferring the sun and trees to stainless steel drawers and silence. I stayed on a while longer. That job taught me how thin the line is between comfort and fear, how easily your mind can tilt one way or the other in the dark. People ask me sometimes if I believe in ghosts. I don't. Not exactly. But I believe that some things stay with us. Images, moments, a sound you weren't expecting in a room that should be still. And every so often, when I walk down a quiet hallway or see a flicker of light just out of place, I remember that night, the creak of the gurney, the way Sean ran like something had snapped, and that body sitting up like it had remembered something it needed to finish. I don't really talk about this much. Not because I've forgotten, but because it stayed so sharp in my mind that I don't need to. It's just always there, like something you keep hidden at the back of a drawer. Not gone, just tucked out of sight. But lately I've been thinking about it again, especially now that I'm older and have more distance. And the truth is, I don't think I've ever been more afraid than I was that summer. I was 16. My brother had just turned 13. It was the kind of summer that smelled like cut grass and gasoline, hot, dry, and slow. The kind of days where the air didn't move, and the sun seemed like it was sitting directly on your shoulders. We lived in a one-story house on the edge of a small rural town in eastern Montana. No one really came out that way unless they meant to. Just a handful of houses, a faded main street, and the train tracks that divided everything into before and after. Our dad was the kind of man people tried not to look at directly. He had a presence that filled the room before he said a word. When I was younger, I thought that was just how fathers were. But over time, I learned to recognize the weight of the silence he carried, and the way it could turn heavy fast. He was strict. That's what folks used to call it. Old school, they'd say. Tough love. But that wasn't it. It wasn't discipline. It was control. And once you learn the difference, you never unlearn it. My brother and I stayed quiet most days. We didn't want to draw attention. You learn how to move without making noise in a house like that. You learn to listen for changes in footsteps, the way a chair scrapes against tile, the tone of a sigh. You pick up those things like survival tools. The day it happened, I was at my part-time job bagging groceries at the corner store. I remember that detail so clearly. It's strange what your mind holds on to. The way the sliding doors hissed, the sound of the register beeping, the old man with the fishing hat who always paid in change. My shift ended around 6 p.m. I walked home. It wasn't far, just past the church and over the small bridge where the creek ran dry by July. The sun was starting to dip. Crickets were chirping low in the grass. It was just an ordinary walk. That's what still gets to me, how ordinary everything felt. When I opened the front door, I smelled bleach. Not the faint smell of cleaning. No, it was strong. So strong it made my throat tighten. The kind of smell that makes your eyes water if you stay in it too long. And the house was too quiet. Not quiet like someone sleeping, but quiet like something had happened, and everyone forgot to keep pretending. I called out. No answer. Then I noticed my stepmother kneeling on the basement landing. She had a sponge in one hand and a red plastic bucket beside her. The tile around her was smeared with streaks. It wasn't just dirt. It was darker, thicker. She looked up, but her face didn't change, not even a little. Go to your room, she said. My legs didn't move. I looked past her, just a second too long, long enough to see what was on the floor behind her. And that's when I saw the blood, more than I'd ever seen before, spread in a wide, messy fan across the white tile, with splatters up the side of the washing machine, like something had exploded. And then I saw my brother. He was sitting against the far wall, shirtless, pale, with his knees drawn up close. His chest was wrapped in a towel that had turned entirely red. His eyes were open, but glassy. He wasn't crying. He looked like he wasn't fully in the room anymore. He saw me looking, and then he blinked, just once, and it was like that one movement snapped me out of the shock. I ran to him. He didn't speak. He just whispered, "I'm okay," like it was his job to reassure me. I still don't understand how he was calm. There was a hole the size of a baseball just below his collarbone. His hands were shaking. Later, much later, I'd learned the full story. Our father had been down in the basement, messing around with an old 12-gauge shotgun he kept in a locked cabinet. said he was cleaning it. My brother had come down to get a box of cereal from the pantry shelf. That's when it went off. Point blank. The buckshot tore through him and missed his heart by 2 inches. If it had been any higher, he wouldn't have survived. That's what the paramedics said. A miracle. But here's the thing. The police showed up hours later, and somehow it was all an accident. That's what they told us. Just a horrible, unfortunate mistake. Our stepmother backed it up. Said my brother startled him. Said he didn't mean it. My brother didn't contradict it. Neither did I. We were too scared. Too used to being quiet. They treated his wound, stitched him up, and left us with him. As if it was safe. We didn't talk much after that. I think silence became a second language in that house. But that summer changed everything. The light felt different. The air heavier. The walls thinner. He never apologized. Never said anything at all about what happened. My brother kept to himself after that. He started wearing thick hoodies even in the heat. I could still see the shape of the bandages beneath the fabric. Every so often, he'd flinch when someone shut a door too hard. We never really spoke about that day. Not properly. But one night, as we sat on the roof of the garage watching the stars, he looked over and said, "You know, pieces of it still come out sometimes." I didn't understand at first. He touched his chest. "Shrapnel," he said. "Little bits. They push up through the skin every few months. Feels like being reminded." And that was when we decided, quietly, without much fuss, that we'd leave. At 18, I packed a bag, and he followed. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't look back. Just got on the first bus going out of town and rode until the mountains came into view. He sat by the window the whole way, one hand pressed against his chest, as if guarding something fragile inside. We haven't spoken to our father since. And to be honest, I don't care what became of him. That house, that basement, the tile floor, it all belongs to another life now, a life I've buried deeper than I care to admit. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still smell the bleach, sharp and cold, like it's trying to erase something that never should have happened. And sometimes, I wonder how many people are walking around with their own shrapnel under the skin. The kind you don't see until it pushes its way to the surface. Some stories stick to you, not because they're full of ghosts or flickering lights, but because they start out feeling safe, normal. Then something shifts, and nothing ever feels quite right again. I was 20 when it happened. This was in the summer of 2011, back when I was still figuring myself out. I'd moved into a low-rise apartment complex near campus in eastern Oregon, one of those half-beaten, half-charming places with tan stucco walls and a shared pool that always looked better in the brochure than it did in real life. The water was cloudy most days, and the plastic pool furniture looked like it had been around since the 90s, cracked, sun-bleached, the works. Still, it was cheap, and at 20, cheap is good enough. That summer was brutally hot. The kind of heat that doesn't let up even at night. You'd lie in bed with a fan in your face and still feel like your sheets were made of damp towels. So we did what a lot of people in our building did, drifted out to the pool after dark, beers in hand, half-dressed and barefoot, just trying to cool off. There was a group of us who hung out regularly back then, 5 or 6 people, all students, or just barely out of school. Some of them lived in my building, others just showed up. One of them was a guy I'd known since freshman year. I'll call him Mason. He had this sharp kind of charm, quick to laugh, always had a story. He wasn't the loudest in the group, but he didn't need to be. Mason had that kind of presence that made you feel like things were fine, like whatever was going wrong could wait until tomorrow. The night it happened, we'd all gathered around the pool after a long Friday. It must have been past 10, maybe closer to midnight. There weren't any pool lights on, just a few porch lamps glowing from the balconies above us, casting long shadows across the pavement. Somebody had a small Bluetooth speaker playing low music, and a few of us had climbed into the water, sitting along the edge with our legs dangling in. The air smelled like hot concrete and chlorine. The kind of smell that sticks to your skin, even after you've dried off. A few empty beer cans rolled lazily near a corner drain. It was quiet in that way. Summer nights are soft, stretched out, with the hum of insects in the background and the occasional hiss from a can being opened. Mason was standing a few feet away from the deep end, pacing a bit, holding a bottle in one hand. He was barefoot, shirtless, wearing just swim trunks. I remember him saying something like, "Watch this, I'm gonna dive clean," but then pausing. He gave this little laugh, that half-drunk kind of sound, and took a few quick steps like he was going to leap in. But he didn't. At the very last second, he pulled back. Maybe second-guessed the depth, or just lost his nerve. And that's when it happened. His feet skidded across the wet concrete, and his whole body pitched forward. I heard the sound first, this awful wet crack, as his chin hit the edge of the pool, and then a dull thud as the rest of him followed. Water splashed up over the edge, but he never made it in. His head caught the lip of the pool, and the rest of him collapsed like a sack of bricks. I was already moving by the time the bottle hit the ground and shattered. At first, I didn't even think it was just instinct. I ran toward him, calling his name, hearing voices behind me rising, someone gasping, someone else swearing loudly. Mason was lying half in, half out of the water, face down. His arms were twisted underneath him, like he didn't know where they belonged. I dropped beside him, yelling for someone to call 911. I remember that clearly. My voice didn't even sound like mine. We rolled him over, as gently as we could. His eyes were open, but they weren't looking at anything. His mouth was slack, and his chest wasn't moving right. It was like watching a puppet without strings. A couple of the others were frozen in place, just standing back, not sure what to do. The paramedics came fast, faster than I expected. Maybe someone down the block had already called after hearing the commotion. The flashing lights lit up the pool deck like a crime scene. When they lifted him onto the stretcher, I remember how his arms just hung limp. That's when I knew it was bad. Not a bruise or stitches kind of bad. Something deeper. Final. Later, we found out he'd broken his neck. Clean break. Just like that, everything below his shoulders had gone silent. He was lucky to be alive, they said. But it didn't feel lucky. He spent months in the hospital, then longer in rehab. I visited him twice, once when he could barely speak, and again when he'd started using a mouth-controlled wheelchair. Both times I left feeling like someone had taken the air out of me. The thing that haunted me most wasn't the fall or the sound of it. It was the moment right before, when he'd started running, and then pulled back. Like some small part of him knew, like he felt something a split second too late. I don't know, maybe that's just my brain trying to make sense of something that didn't have a reason. I moved out of that complex the next semester. Couldn't look at the pool the same way again. Even walking past it to grab mail made my jaw clench. People always expect horror stories to come with shadows, or whispers, or something crawling up the stairs. But real fear doesn't always wear a costume. Sometimes, it's just a slippery stretch of pavement and a heartbeat too late. To this day, whenever I pass a pool, I hear that sound again, that horrible crack. And I remember how fast something can break, how one moment can split a life into before and after. And now, when someone tells me, "Don't worry, it's just for fun," I think of Mason, and I walk. There are parts of the world that don't want to be seen. I'm convinced of that now. This happened back in 2003, when I was 24. I'd taken a break between work contracts and booked a cheap solo hiking trip through parts of Ecuador and southern Colombia. I was looking for a reset, something that didn't involve city streets or computer screens, just open air, dim screen, and the quiet you only get when you're miles from anywhere. I was with a guided group for most of the trek, 6 of us, all tourists. We'd camped for the night in a low valley at the edge of the forest, a few hours south of a village that didn't even have a paved road. The guide was a local man in his 50s who barely said 10 words all day, but he knew those trails like they were veins on his palm. On the second morning, we were hiking a narrow track alongside a riverbed. The water was low, just enough to cover the rocks and shimmer in the early sun. The group stopped to rest near a patch of trees with thick, moss-covered trunks. I remember the air smelled like wet clay and rotting leaves. It wasn't unpleasant, just thick and earthy, like something ancient lived in the soil. I wandered off a little to take some photos. Nothing far, maybe 100 feet at most. I just wanted a better angle on the ridgeline. The others were still in sight. That's when the ground gave out beneath me. No warning, just a sudden sucking drop. It was like the earth unzipped under my boots. I didn't even have time to yell. I fell straight down into cold black water and was gone before I could figure out what had happened. I remember the shock of it. The way the cold slapped every inch of me. My head went under instantly. It was pitch dark. I didn't know which way was up. The current grabbed me hard, like hands yanking me from all directions. My back hit a rock. My shoulder scraped something jagged. I tried to scream but took in water instead. It burned going down. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like minutes, but could have been seconds. The current didn't slow. It just kept pushing, pulling, tumbling me through the black. I reached out, desperate for something solid, but my fingers kept slipping along wet stone. Everything was slick and tight, like the tunnel was barely wider than my body. I wasn't thinking clearly. There was no time. My lungs screamed. My chest heaved. I remember thinking, this is how it ends. Alone underground in the middle of a rainforest I couldn't even name. And then suddenly, the pressure changed. The water opened into a wider space. I couldn't see anything, but the current wasn't as strong here. It felt like I was floating in a hollow pocket. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. It was still pitch black, but the silence was worse than the rushing water. It was thick, pressing, like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do. Somehow I hadn't blacked out yet. I kicked gently, trying not to lose what little energy I had left. My legs brushed open space below me. My fingertips skimmed stone above. I twisted, blindly, reaching in every direction. I remember thinking, water flows. It always has somewhere to go. So, I swam. I couldn't tell if I was moving down or sideways. I just followed the soft tug of the current, hoping it knew more than I did. My limbs were numb. My teeth were clacking. But I kept going. Then, faint. Ahead of me, I saw something. Not a shape. A glow. A pale, soft light, like moonlight through milk. At first I thought I imagined it, but as I moved, it brightened. I pushed toward it with everything I had left. My lungs were past empty. My vision blurred. I struck something above me. Dirt. Then stone, but I could see now the light was coming from just beyond. I clawed at it. I wasn't thinking anymore. Just digging. One hand, then the other, pushing upward. Desperate. Finally, the surface broke. I burst out into sunlight like something reborn, coughed until I couldn't breathe, sprawled in wet grass, covered in mud, shaking so hard I couldn't tell what was water and what was me. I lay there for minutes, maybe longer. The world was spinning. The trees above looked strange, stretched and wrong, like I wasn't seeing them from the right angle. Eventually I stood. My legs nearly gave out. I was a few hundred feet from the trail. I recognized one of the marker trees, and just beyond that, the ridge we'd passed earlier. The others were still up ahead, standing by the riverbank. When they saw me stumbling out of the woods, soaked and pale, they looked stunned, like they weren't sure if I was real. One of them, the guide, ran to me. I couldn't speak, just dropped to my knees and pointed behind me. They didn't find the hole. The ground was solid, not even a crack. I tried explaining later what had happened, where I'd gone, how I'd ended up in that hollow space. They nodded politely, but I could tell they didn't believe me. Not entirely. I wouldn't have believed me either. But I know what I felt down there. I know what it's like to be swallowed by the earth and spat back out like a secret. And sometimes, late at night, when it rains just right, and the wind moves in that slow spiraling way, I can still feel the current pulling at me, like it remembers me too. You get used to a certain rhythm in this job. Calls come in, you handle them, you move on. Some stick with you longer than others. A messy scene, a close call, maybe a case that never got resolved, but most fade into the noise. Most. This one never did. It was late summer, heat settling over the city like a wet blanket. I remember that clearly because the AC in my cruiser had started giving out again. I was wiping sweat from the back of my neck when dispatch called it in. Welfare check. Single mom hadn't shown up to work in 3 days. Co-workers said it wasn't like her. No answer to texts, calls, nothing. They were worried. When I pulled up to the apartment complex, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Middle of the day, but not a sound. No kids running around, no chatter from open windows. Just the sun glaring off cracked pavement and the faint drone of an old AC unit hanging from a second-story window. Hers, I'd find out later. I knocked the first time lightly, like I always do when I'm hoping it's just a misunderstanding. No answer. Tried again, louder. Nothing. I pressed my ear to the door. No footsteps, no movement, not even the buzz of a TV or hum of a fan. That silence, it's hard to explain. It's like the air goes still in places like that. I checked the leasing office. They gave me the spare key after confirming she hadn't picked up packages in days. Her car was still in the lot. All signs were pointing one way, but I still held on to hope. The second I opened the door, the smell hit me. It's not like in the movies. It's not dramatic or sudden. It's heavy, damp, sweet, and wrong. A smell that settles in your clothes, sticks to your hair, stays with you long after you leave. I'd smelled it before. I already knew. She was in the living room, slumped into one corner of a threadbare couch, head tilted to the side, like she might have just dozed off, but she was gone. She'd been gone for a while. That alone would have been enough. But then I saw the toddler. At first I thought the kid was asleep, curled up at her side with a small changing pad pulled over like a blanket. Then I saw the position, arms awkwardly drawn up, lips cracked. I called it in, didn't even walk further in, just backed out into the hallway and sat down on the stairs, my elbows on my knees. I didn't cry right then. Not in front of the techs. Not while they carried out 2 small sealed bags. Later that evening, I couldn't shake it. I kept replaying it, how everything in that apartment had stayed untouched, like time had stopped. A few empty drawers in the kitchen were left half open, cabinet doors too, like the little one had been searching. Maybe for snacks, maybe just for something cold. She'd died first, probably in her sleep. Natural causes, something unexpected, something silent. The child, he stayed there. No one knows how long he lasted. But I do, because on the wall, just above the kitchen counter, there was a set of smudged little handprints. Faint, sticky, desperate. Just high enough to suggest he'd tried to reach something. Maybe the handle of the fridge, maybe the phone. They said he laid down next to her in the end, on that pad, like he'd been trained to, like he was still waiting for her to wake up and change him. I went home that night and sat in the dark for a long time. Didn't turn on the TV, didn't touch my dinner, just stared at the far wall while the silence of that apartment looped in my ears like a bad dream. I've seen worse scenes, messier ones, but nothing ever got to me like that did. Nothing else ever made me feel the kind of ache that crept in after. Sometimes, I still wonder if he cried, or if, after a while, he stopped. My hands shook when I filled out the report, just slightly. Enough that the letters weren't as clean as usual. But I wrote every word. You tell yourself you're just doing your job, that it's part of it, that it won't follow you home. But some things do. And sometimes it's not the horror of what happened that gets to you. It's the quiet. It's the empty rooms and half-open cabinets. It's the story the scene tells without a sound. That little boy never had a chance. And I carry him with me. Every time I open a door. I've never liked the way the air feels after sundown at school events. There's something off about watching the world shut down around a place that's normally so alive. I was 17 that spring, tired from a long track meet, legs sore, skin still hot from the sun that had finally dipped behind the trees. Our team had just wrapped up the relay events at a regional meet about an hour from our school. We didn't win much that day, but that wasn't the part that stuck with me. The part that stuck with me came after the races were over. After the medals had been handed out, after most of the families had started to clear out. It was just past 8:30 p.m., and the stadium lights still buzzed overhead like dying insects. A few of us, me, 2 guys from my team, and a girl from the shot put squad wandered back toward the parking lot to wait for our coach, who was inside the school building signing some paperwork. The meet had gone late, and most of the buses had already left. Ours was still parked in the far corner, away from the rest, shaded by an overgrown line of pine trees. We weren't saying much, just half laughing at some dumb inside joke while sipping from warm sports drinks. It wasn't cold, but there was a bite in the air that didn't match the season. The breeze came in light and sharp, just enough to set the flag at the far end of the field, fluttering like it had something to say. That's when we saw him. He was maybe 40 feet away, standing between two light poles at the edge of the parking lot. I didn't notice him walk up. He wasn't there 1 minute, and the next he was just standing there, not facing us directly, just sort of hovering in our general direction, his hands buried deep in the pockets of a black windbreaker. His hood was up, casting a strange shadow over his face. At first I thought maybe he was someone's dad, maybe a janitor or staff member waiting for the lot to clear out. But he didn't move like someone who was waiting. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, then took a small step toward us, and then another. It wasn't direct, just enough to let us know he was slowly closing the distance. We all went quiet. No one said it. But we all saw him at the same time. We stood still beside the bus, like kids caught doing something wrong. The lot felt too big all of a sudden, too empty. He got within maybe 30 feet, and then something happened that I've never forgotten. Not because of what it was, but because of how quickly it broke the moment. A dark green Jeep Cherokee came barreling out of nowhere. Not from the main road, not from the school entrance. It turned in hard from the backside of the lot, its tires screeching slightly as it came to a stop between us and the man. The headlights were off, but the driver's window was down. The man with the windbreaker stopped in his tracks. The Jeep idled for a second before the driver leaned out. An older guy, gray beard, wearing a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves. His voice cracked through the lot like gravel being dumped on pavement. Back off. Walk the hell away. No hesitation, no drama, just 5 words. The man in the windbreaker didn't say anything. He just stood there for a moment longer, then slowly backed away without making a sound. He never looked at the man in the Jeep. He didn't look at us either, just turned and drifted out of the lot the same way he came in, disappearing beyond the trees as if he'd melted into them. The Jeep stayed parked for a moment longer. The engine idled. Then, just like that, the man inside gave us a single nod and drove off. No headlights, no plate, I could remember. Just that sound of tires brushing gravel, fading until all we could hear was the soft whine of the field lights above. Nobody spoke for a long time. Even when our coach came back and opened the bus doors, we didn't really say much. I think one of the guys said something like, "That was weird," but even that didn't feel like enough. There was a heaviness on the ride home. Not fear, exactly, something closer to the edge of it, something cold, something that sat in your chest and made it hard to look out the window for too long. I've thought about it for years, about who that man in the windbreaker was, and what might have happened if that Jeep hadn't shown up, what his intentions were, why he picked us out in a nearly empty lot, and most of all, how the man in the Jeep knew. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He knew, before we did. Some people believe in guardian angels. I don't, but I do believe in something else. Instinct maybe, or fate. I don't have a word for it. But whatever it was, it showed up that night, in an old Jeep Cherokee, with a stranger behind the wheel, and timing too perfect to be random. I never saw that man again. Not at another meet. Not in town. Nowhere. But every once in a while, if I find myself walking alone in the lot at night, I catch myself glancing toward the trees, and I wonder if someone's watching, or if someone should be. It was the kind of evening that sits oddly in the memory. Quiet, a little too quiet for comfort, like the air itself was holding its breath. I was 11, maybe 12, and we were at the small community center on the edge of a neighborhood I didn't know well. My dad had brought me along to a gathering. I don't even remember what it was exactly. Something with other families, a potluck, or a game night. The kind of event where parents try to make small talk and kids get bored fast. The inside of the building was bright, humming with voices, laughter, the clinking of dishes. I had forgotten something in my dad's car. My jacket, I think. Or maybe my handheld game. Either way, it felt important at the time. So I slipped out the side door, letting it creak shut behind me. It was just past dusk, that strange middle ground where everything is technically visible, but not really clear. The parking lot stretched out in front of me, lined with old halogen street lamps that barely worked. Most of them flickered. A few didn't come on at all. The sky was an overcast gray-blue, the kind that seems to trap the warmth from the day and turn it into something heavy. I remember the sound of my sneakers on the asphalt. It echoed louder than it should have, bouncing off the sides of nearby buildings. There weren't many cars in the lot. I spotted ours near the back, parked by a row of half-dead bushes and a rusted-out chain-link fence. I was halfway there when I noticed him. At first, I didn't register anything wrong. He was just a man, bearded, maybe in his late 30s, wearing an old gray coat. But the way he moved made something inside me tense. He wasn't walking from a car. He wasn't heading into the building. He was drifting sideways across the lot, like someone cutting across a field with no real destination. His eyes caught mine. I didn't stop walking, but I slowed. Then, he changed direction. I knew with that weird cold certainty you only get in moments like these, that he was coming toward me. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I turned around and walked briskly back toward the building. I didn't run. I didn't want to. Not because I wasn't scared, but because I thought if I started running, he'd start running too. I could hear his shoes behind me. Not close, but there. The door was still ajar, just an inch. I slipped inside, the warm fluorescent light washing over me like a wave. I turned around to see if he was still following. He was, and he walked right in behind me. He didn't try to hide it. He walked in like he belonged there, scanning the room with calm, unreadable eyes. He didn't talk, didn't make a sound, but he had something with him, a small whiteboard slate and a marker. He looked around for a moment, then began writing. I watched, standing near the snack table, heart banging in my ears, as he slowly wrote a sentence and turned it toward one of the parents. He is my son. I've come to take him home. I don't know what that moment looked like from the outside. All I know is my dad saw it. He must have seen the look on my face, or maybe he caught the man looking my way. But I remember my dad's voice, cutting through the noise, not loud, but firm. He told the man to get out, to put the board down and leave. The man didn't argue. He just stared for a second, then slowly erased the message, turned, and walked back out the door. No yelling, no threats, just quiet footsteps fading into the night. Someone called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone, disappeared into the streets outside. They asked me a few questions, but I couldn't remember much. Just his beard, his eyes, the board. Later that night, when I was supposed to be asleep, I stood at my bedroom window and stared into the dark, wondering what he wanted, wondering what he really thought he was doing, wondering what would have happened if I had been just a little slower. The weirdest part? I don't think he was crazy. Not completely. He looked calm, certain, like he really believed I belonged to him. For weeks after that, I had this fear he'd show up again, that I'd see him outside the school gates or near the grocery store, that he'd be waiting for me somewhere just out of sight, with that board in his hands. But he never came back. And now, years later, I still catch myself checking the shadows when I walk through a parking lot. Still get a chill when I see someone standing too still, watching, writing. Because that night changed something in me. Made the world feel a little less safe. And it reminded me that sometimes the scariest things don't shout. They just wait, and watch, and write. When I was 21, I moved back in with my dad for a while. It was one of those weird in-between phases of life. I just finished a short-term contract job that didn't turn into anything long-term, so I was broke and directionless. My dad lived in this old, weathered two-story house out in rural northern Pennsylvania. It sat just off a quiet road, surrounded by trees that looked like they'd been watching the place for a century. The kind of house that didn't creak because it was old. It creaked because it was alive. I spent most of my time upstairs, in my old childhood bedroom. Same faded blue walls, same scuffed dresser from when I was 10. The house hadn't changed much. My dad still kept the wood furnace running in the basement, same as always. He didn't trust electric heat, said it didn't have the same soul. You had to tend that furnace constantly in the winter, feeding it logs every few hours, or it would die out and take the whole house's warmth with it. He was always the one to handle it, even when I offered. It was a Tuesday, middle of the day, maybe around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. The sky was that cold, iron gray, and the trees outside were completely still. I was lying on my bed scrolling through my phone, job hunting and pretending to be productive. I heard the furnace hatch clank shut downstairs, metal on metal, like a deep old cough echoing through the floorboards. My dad was down in the basement tending the fire. I got up and stretched. Decided I'd go downstairs, maybe grab some coffee and sit on the porch for a bit. As I started down the steps, I heard footsteps coming up from the basement, steady, slow, climbing the wooden stairs. For whatever reason, I didn't think much of it. My dad had always moved like that, deliberate, heavy. I was halfway down when I realized I'd forgotten my phone. I turned around and went back up. No big deal. I grabbed the phone, then paused. I could hear my dad still walking on the basement stairs, or so I thought. Then silence, a long pause, like someone standing right at the door. A moment later, my dad came into my room from the hallway. He looked strange. His face was pale and drawn tight, like he'd seen something he didn't understand. He didn't speak right away, just stared past me, toward the stairs. "You just ran past the basement, right?" he finally asked, voice low. I blinked. "No, I was coming down, but I went back up to grab my phone. I didn't run past anything." He didn't say anything at first, just nodded slowly, as if he was trying to piece something together. He sat on the edge of my bed, staring down at the floor. "I saw you," he said, almost whispering. "Or I thought I did. Someone who looked just like you came past the basement door. Quick, just a blur. Same height, same build, but he was wearing a red hoodie. You're wearing black." I looked down at myself. Black hoodie, jeans. Definitely hadn't changed clothes. "You sure?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. But something about the way he said it didn't sit right. He nodded again, more certain this time. "It wasn't you. It couldn't have been." I stood there, the silence stretching between us. I could hear the ticking of the old kitchen clock downstairs, the soft hum of the fridge. I tried to come up with an explanation. Maybe he saw his reflection in the glass of the basement door. Maybe the light caught a shadow. Maybe it was nothing. But my dad isn't the kind to imagine things. He's grounded, logical, practical to a fault, and he looked rattled. We went downstairs together. Slowly, he opened the basement door and flipped the switch. The light buzzed to life, revealing the steep, narrow staircase. The air smelled like soot and old pine. The furnace stood at the far end, logs crackling softly inside. There was no one down there, no red hoodie, nothing out of place. Still, I checked every corner. The storage room under the stairs, the shelves of paint cans and tools, even behind the furnace where the shadows gathered thick and deep, nothing. After that, we didn't talk much about it, not directly. But for days afterward, I caught my dad watching me, just for a moment, when I'd come into a room, as if checking, as if making sure it was really me. A week or so later, I was outside stacking firewood when he came out with a thermos, handed it to me and said, "If you ever see something that looks like me but isn't me, don't speak to it." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He didn't elaborate, just turned and went back inside. The screen door creaked shut behind him. It's been years since that day, and I haven't seen anything strange myself. But I think about it often, how certain he was, how pale he looked, how it wasn't just a shadow or a trick of light. Sometimes at night, when I'm lying in bed in that same upstairs room, I hear the furnace hatch slam shut, and I wonder what would I do if I saw someone coming up the basement stairs who looked just like me, wearing the wrong clothes, moving just a little too fast. I'm not sure. I want to find out. I don't talk about this much, not because it's too painful or too dark, or even hard to believe. I don't talk about it because people never react the way I expect them to. They either laugh like I'm telling a ghost story, or they tilt their head and say something like, maybe it was a dream. But I know what I saw. We were living in East Cheshire at the time. This was in 1992, just after my 8th birthday. My family had moved from a flat in the city to a small brick house on the edge of the countryside. It sat near the woods, just where the town began to bleed into farmland. Our road ended at a narrow bridge, the kind with rusted guardrails and weeds pushing up through the cracked pavement. Beneath it ran a stream that we called the beck. The beck wasn't wide, and most days it was shallow enough to wade across. The water was cold, sharp on your ankles, and the stones on the bed were always slick with moss. It wasn't a beautiful place, not really, but to a kid, it had a kind of strange magnetism. My brother and I used to go down there with sticks, poking around in the mud, pretending we were adventurers. The day I remember, it was warm, July or early August. Mom had sent us out after lunch with that usual half-hearted warning, be back before tea, and don't fall in. We took the shortcut through the field behind the garage. My brother was a few years older than me, lanky and faster, always just ahead. The grass came up to our knees, bees floated low over the clover, and you could hear the occasional drone of a car passing on the far road. When we reached the bridge, we dropped down the embankment like we always did, landing in the dry patch of dirt where the sun never really reached. I remember the smell, damp rocks, old leaves, something slightly metallic. My brother started throwing pebbles into the stream, aiming for the little whirlpools where the current snagged around fallen branches. I don't remember what made me look under the bridge. Maybe it was the way the shadows shifted, or maybe I was just bored. I crouched down near one of the concrete supports and saw something that didn't belong. A dark shape in the water, barely moving. At first, I thought it was a sack. Someone had dumped rubbish, which wasn't unusual, but when I stepped closer, something about the edges looked too neat, too smooth. I leaned down with my stick and gave it a nudge. It turned. A face, pale, bloated, eyes open but cloudy. A man in a suit, the fabric clinging strangely to his body in the current. His tie floated around his neck like seaweed. I think I remember a button missing on his shirt. There was a kind of stillness in him that didn't match the flow of the water. I stood there for what felt like a full minute. Then I shouted for my brother. He came over, but by then I was backing up the hill, scrambling up the dirt, and pulling him with me. I remember the panic in my chest, but I don't remember what I said to him. I just know we didn't go back down. We ran home. Now, this is where things start to come apart. When I told Mom and Dad, they just looked at each other like I was telling another story. My brother didn't back me up. In fact, he seemed confused. He said he didn't see anything, didn't remember me calling out, that he thought I'd just got scared of a frog or something. But I know what I saw. I can still picture the skin on the man's face, the way the current moved his hair. I checked the papers later, much later, when I was in university. I went to the local library and combed through microfilm reels from 1991. Nothing about a body in the beck, no missing man in a suit, no headlines about drownings or suicides or any of the things you might expect. I even emailed a local historian once. She told me there were no police reports matching my description. Not from that time, not from that place, but the memory is still there, unchanged. Here's the part that troubles me most. Sometimes when I think back on it, I can feel the stick in my hand. I can remember the exact way the man turned in the water, like he was waiting for someone to notice him, like he wanted me to see. I think about that moment more often than I should. Sometimes I wonder if the body was ever there at all. But that doesn't make me feel better, because if it wasn't, if it was something else entirely, that's somehow worse. And every once in a while, when I visit home and walk past that old bridge, I still glance down into the water, just to be sure he's not back. I remember that evening clearer than most things from my childhood, sharper than birthdays, louder than Christmas mornings. I was 11 years old, left at home to look after my siblings while our parents ran to the store for groceries. We lived deep in the country, surrounded by fields that always looked gray by evening, even in the middle of summer. The kind of place where the stillness settles in your bones, and the silence at night isn't broken by traffic, but by things you can't quite name. Our house stood at the end of a gravel driveway, long and winding, where every car that rolled down it could be heard crunching over stone from a half-mile away. We had one neighbor, a fisherman who lived in a squat 2-story house that sat maybe 100 feet from ours. He was rarely home. He traveled for work, sometimes gone for months at a time. By that point in the year, his place had been quiet for weeks, porch lights always off, blinds drawn, no cars in the driveway. Nothing but a thin film of dust on the windows and a pile of junk mail gathering under the door. That night, the sky was the color of ash. Not quite dark, not quite light, just that in-between hour when your eyes play tricks on you. My little sister was sprawled out on the living room rug with a book. My younger brother sat at the table, flipping through TV channels, even though the signal barely worked. I was upstairs, staring out my bedroom window, not thinking about much. And then I saw him. At first, I thought it was a mannequin. Something about the shape. It didn't move right. Just stood there, on the porch of our neighbor's empty house, still as stone. His body was covered in black, skin-tight fabric, from neck to feet, like a bodysuit. Over that was a clown mask, hard and shiny, the kind that looked molded out of something stiff. Porcelain, maybe? The hair was the most vibrant thing in the scene. An explosion of bright red curls, stiff as wire, like someone had cut off a cheap party wig and glued it to the sides of the mask. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he didn't vanish. He just stood there, slightly hunched forward, arms by his sides. I called my sister up. She grumbled but came anyway, climbing the stairs with that heavy kid-footed stomp. I didn't say a word. I just pointed. Her mouth fell open, and then she whispered, "What is that?" And right then, as if hearing her, the clown's head turned. Slow, precise, not startled, not curious, like he had already been looking at us in some way, even with his body still. He looked up at our window, directly at us. The mask didn't move. It was molded with a smile, but somehow it seemed to deepen, or maybe it was just the tilt of his head. His hand raised slowly, fingers curled in an exaggerated wave. Then, with the same hand, he beckoned us. The motion was slow and deliberate, as though he had nowhere else to be, no urgency at all. We both dropped to the floor. I remember the carpet scraping my knees. I grabbed her arm, and we crawled under my bed. She started crying. I didn't speak. I just listened for footsteps on the porch, for the crunch of gravel, for any sound at all. Nothing came. Minutes felt like hours. The light in my room dimmed, shifting from slate gray to the kind of black that lives in old closets. My legs cramped, but I didn't move. My sister had stopped crying, but I could feel her holding her breath. Eventually, we heard the front door creak open. I panicked. I knew we'd locked it. I knew we had. Then I heard my parents' voices, bags rustling, keys jingling, casual conversation. We bolted downstairs. I was stammering so fast my words were coming out in pieces. My dad kept asking, "What are you talking about?" over and over, trying to make sense of the panic on our faces. He checked the neighbor's porch, walked the whole yard. Nothing. He even knocked on the neighbor's door, just in case someone had returned without telling anyone. It stayed locked. The lights were still off. There were no footprints in the dirt, no tire marks in the gravel. He told us it was probably just some older kid messing around. Maybe a costume left over from Halloween. Maybe one of the boys from school playing a joke. I wanted to believe that, but something about the way that man moved, how still he was, how exact his gestures were. It wasn't playful. It wasn't drunk. It felt like ritual, like it was meant to be remembered. For weeks after that, my sister refused to go into her room alone. I pushed my dresser against the window and slept with a flashlight under my pillow. I'd still check the neighbor's porch every night, just in case. But he never came back. Years later, when the house was sold and we'd long since moved away, I brought it up with my sister again. Her face went pale. She didn't want to talk about it. She remembered every detail. She still sees that mask in her dreams sometimes. The way he tilted his head. The way he lifted that hand and invited us, silently, to come down. To this day, I don't know if what we saw was a person, or something dressed like one, but I've never trusted clowns since. Not the funny ones, not the painted ones, and especially not the ones who show up where no one should be. I was 16 the weekend this happened. It was a rare day off, no school, no soccer practice, and my older sister and I were chilling in the back room of our suburban home on a sunny Saturday afternoon. I was on my laptop, scrolling through stories on a forum, and she was flipping through an art magazine. The air smelled faintly of her nail polish in the dusty corner of my speaker. Our mom was due home any minute. She worked at the vet clinic and clocked out around 1 or 2. I heard the front door click open downstairs. Then that familiar voice. "Hey, I'm home!" My sister looked up. "Mom," she called. She set the magazine down and headed toward the stairs. I swung in my chair, curious. The timing was perfect. Then I paused. My laptop speakers were off. The TV was silent. It couldn't have been from the house. The voice sounded live, not recorded or echoing. My sister was halfway up the stairs when my older brother descended, towel in hand. "Is that Mom?" he asked, eyes wide. "Yeah," I said, closing my laptop. "Thought she'd be home soon." But something pinched my gut. We paused on the landing and listened. Nothing. No footsteps on the wooden floors. No echo in the hallway. No car pulling in the driveway. Brother shook his head. That was weird. I went downstairs first. The hallway light flickered on as I stepped over the threshold. The front door was closed, locked, no creak in the frame. I touched the cold doorknob. Quiet. "Mom," I called softly, more to fill the silence than expecting an answer. No voice came back. We searched the whole house. Kitchen empty. Laundry room, the dryer still warm. Garage, no sign of her. It was like she'd never come in, like the voice had been broadcast live, but from an empty room. When she finally arrived an hour later, we were in the living room, with the lights dimmed, cups of cold tea in our hands, staring at the window. Her car rolled into the driveway. About 40 minutes passed, when she might have returned. She never mentioned running late, just lifted the bags of groceries and said goodbye to the dogs. So we told her. We told her the front door had opened. A voice had called out, and 3 of us had heard it. She stared at us, then at the hallway. "You heard me say that?" we asked her. She frowned. "No," she said. "I was still at the clinic. I left my pager in my bag, but it never buzzed." Her brows creased. She asked what we heard exactly. My sister's voice trembled. Mine felt hollow. "Hello, I'm home." That same tone she always used. She checked her bag, her pockets. No keys jingling earlier. No sign she'd stepped in the door. Nothing but a normal weekend. After that, we all started noticing odd things. Footsteps in empty rooms. The microwave turning on by itself. That same phrase drifting through the hallway at random times. "I'm home," but no one else there to say it. It made sense to ask if we were imagining things. I still wonder it sometimes. But having 3 people hear it together, my sister, my brother, and me, that stopped me from writing it off. And every time I hear something that sounds too familiar, my mom humming from another room, the garage door closing, I tense up. I once asked her about it when she passed the window at night. She looked at me and said quietly, "Some things visit when they think we're listening." Then she walked away. I still don't know what it was. A trick of acoustics, an echo from the house settling after years, or something else. Something that sounded exactly like my mom's voice, just to get us to respond. And if it came once, could it come again? I want to start with the moment I realized we weren't alone. My friend and I had driven out to an old burial ground on the outskirts of a small town in southern Ohio. Some local legend called it the Watcher's Plot, a name meant to unsettle tourists. We were in our mid-20s, eager for a cheap thrill. It was late afternoon in early October, leaves turning yellow and brown all around. The air had that damp edge, as if the sun had forgotten to burn off the dew. Perfect atmosphere for a place that claimed ghosts, but of course, there's the real world too. We spent maybe 10 minutes wandering among the moss-covered stones, reading epitaphs and crumbling script. I took pictures of weathered angels and cracked crosses. At one point I glanced back and saw a figure approaching, a man in denim, dark jacket, helmet tucked under one arm, leaning against a black motorcycle, half hidden by the headstones. He looked casual, polite even. I lifted my hand in greeting, and he nodded, smiled. We went back to our private tour. A few minutes later, with our backs to each other exploring separate rows, I heard a soft snap, not natural, like the quick click of a shutter. I never carry a camera, just my phone, and I never took it out. I turned, expecting to see birds or squirrels. Instead, he was there, standing still, phone raised, pointing straight at me and my friend. I don't know how long he'd been frozen like that. 2 silent statues, one of us walking, the other filming. He spotted me noticing. He dropped the phone, fumbled with it for a beat, then turned away as if he'd merely noticed a grave under repair. He started walking toward a different row of stones. My heart hammered, but I kept my voice calm. "Hey, excuse me." He paused, but didn't stop. His head turned so the helmet tucked under his arm cast a shadow over his face. He blinked slowly, then nodded and continued, reaching over to one of the older plots, as though to take another picture. I grabbed my friend's arm and whispered, "Let's go." The walk back to the car felt long, too long. Gravel crunched under our shoes, and every time we passed another mossy stone, I looked back, half expecting him to be right behind us. We reached the gravel lane that led to the parking area. As I slid into my car, the crunch of motorcycle wheels became audible. We looked over the dashboard in time to see him roll out of the cemetery entrance. He parked on the road off to the side and sat there, engine off, head bent toward his phone. As I started the car and slowly pulled out, I saw his head raise, helmet under his arm, glare straight at me. The phone stayed up, angled our way, like fingerprints on a lens. My friend turned in her seat, whispering, "He's not even blinking." She stared as he pressed something, apparently recording us as we left, windows down and hands on the wheel. We didn't stop to discuss. I punched the accelerator. We crested a small hill, and the cemetery dropped behind us, becoming just another set of stones and old trees. The road curved, mingled with highway sounds, and when my passenger checked the rearview mirror again, the black bike was gone. We didn't whisper for an hour. Neither of us slept well that night. Next day, I deleted all my photos of us, of the graves, everything. I figured if he wanted pictures, let them contain only decay and moss. We never spoke about it to anyone else. I kept my phone in airplane mode near cemeteries after that. She deleted her account from the map for that town. Years later, I still check rearview mirrors for bikes parked off-road when I'm alone. I never tracked him down. I don't know if he was a collector, a historian, or someone with darker motives, but I do know this. There's something unsettling about being watched in a place meant for the dead, where memory is supposed to rest, not be recorded by strangers. And sometimes, when I drive past hidden roads or country plots, I can feel that bike engine revving somewhere behind me. Silent, attentive, recording,